I think just to stay on schedule here, we're going to transition to Q&A. And so I believe that will be the audience that's joined us, questions for the panelists before we then do a break.
Thank you so much, Sean, and thank you to everybody else. This has been great. Actually, it's a perfect segue because I've been collecting questions from the audience all along as you were speaking, and I was actually going to start off with one particular question. Is there evidence that employers will be as optimistic about virtual education as educators are? And I think that this really plays very nicely to this last thing you were talking about, was the micro-credentialing and badging. How can you as educators and us as Best Bioed, how can we translate this excitement to the employer perspective so that they know what they're looking for and they know what to ask for?
Great. Well, I guess I'll jump in first since I happen to study that generally. I think employers need to be educated and made familiar with what these things are, and you also need some degree of standards. So while it's just one among many, when you look at the MicroMasters via edX, there's a standard around it, and it's relatively consistent, and it can stack into a degree. We could create a new micro-credential tomorrow, but if you didn't have industry at the table, or someone who's a hiring manager or an HR leader who's ready to kind of interpret what does that mean, that understanding only comes with time. So that's where, if we can bring the employers and the educators more closely together, and we do see that in the certification world. A lot of industry certifications were designed by the industry itself, and then you see it show up in a college curriculum in accounting or supply chain or project management, but it came out of industry. And so that's probably one of the opportunities for life sciences. But let's turn that one to the panelists, if anyone wants to chime in. It's a hard question, and we're still in the early days of it, but it seems like this pandemic and the economy are probably accelerating the interest in micro-credentials.
Yeah, we tried, to that point, Sean, we try to develop all of ours in collaboration with industry, broadly speaking, so that there's input. And I know of employers that look on LinkedIn for skill-based badges and credentials to meet a specific demand that they might not have. I mean, I would encourage communication, right? I think communication between industry and higher education and government, for that matter, they play a role here, is crucial, right? To understand these things and to really move them forward, And I think the original question that Carla was looking at also was talking about, how do we trust online education? Well, I can have students in my classroom who aren't paying any attention to me just as easily as I could have somebody online, right? So I think that, in that regard, it's neither here nor there, but really it's about education and working together to build those things, and also to realize for micro-credentials, it sort of seems to me like a newer concept in biotech, but IBM and GE Aviation have been using these things for a decade, right? And they're good for professional development and morale boosting and education in general.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in this area, actually, there are a lot of professional societies that, I have students that are taking the exams in CQA, CQE, those have a certain standards. And I think higher education is to have a good communication with the industry, knowing what skill sets they're looking for. And with the build around that, but also not lost sight of the essence of higher education. So there's a compromise, but also we can bring together a set of skills that we want to help our students to gain. And so this should be a partnership between industry and education to make this work. Yeah.
Great. Okay, I have another question. What adjustments are being made for the lack of internships or co-op opportunities for students because of social distancing, especially when research requirements are there for graduation, whether that's undergraduate or at a master's level? What have universities been doing to account for this and still allow students to somehow graduate on time?
Perhaps I'll chime in first here from the co-op school, Northeastern, right? My programs all have mandatory co-ops as opposed to thesis. a thesis. So we are seeing a reduction in a number of co-ops, but they're not going away, right? Because in the same vein that we were able to transition to online learning, there are lots of things that can happen in an online environment for a co-op student. You know, one of the challenges is calming the nerves of the student themselves, because they're very, right, if I don't get a co-op or I'm in the lab, I'm never going to get a job, which is of course not the case, and trying to get them to come to that. But there's still lots of opportunity for online interactions, as well as there are some in-person things that are still happening. You know, and from a really operational perspective, the co-op is meant to enhance the experience, and we'll never let it preclude a student from graduating. So we have mechanisms within the university to make sure that students graduate, right, from that perspective. But you know, it is an important part of what we try to do for them. And we might consider other activities where we put together the students into what we call experiential network projects, but they're basically, we put the students together as a consulting group, and then they work with a company or a sponsor to address a question or a problem that's smaller scale than a normal co-op, but still gives them experience, right? And there's all kinds of different things that we can do in that space.
Yeah, so I think speaking to the sorts of things we're doing in terms of summer research experiences, just as an example, in some ways what we're trying to do is to be flexible. If you think about what a research experience is composed of, you have the actual doing, let's say, of experiments, there's design, and there's analysis. And so I think what we're trying to do now is be creative about the sequencing within the context of a particular lab, of if students can't really come to the lab yet, can they really focus on the design? And if the lab happens to have a bench of data that's already present for analysis, can they actually double down on the analysis such that we buy ourselves time, so that when the lab reopens, they can then segue into the actual hands-on piece. So it's kind of a question of so far rearranging the order of things that might have traditionally gone in a different way to, if you will, delay hands-on to a time when that's possible. So that's one option that we're doing for the summer.
Great, thank you. Some other people wanted to know about specific challenges that you had in getting faculty and administration to sort of break old habits and old norms. How have you addressed these challenges going forward? I've heard wonderful ideas about, you know, redesigning curriculum from the top down, thinking about exactly what the students need to be learning. But how do you do that from a tactical perspective?
I'll just make one quick comment, and then everybody else can comment. This is something I've been pushing for internally for a long time, and this just accelerated the momentum, which I think was great and proved the point that these are things that we needed to consider.
I think one of the biggest challenges for faculty as they approach this new situation is just simply time, right? Research active faculty are not trained in education theory, and now we are saying redesign your class in a new framework that they've never known, nor do they have time, nor should they have time to read the educational literature in best practices. And so one of the mechanisms that we've been talking about is actually providing one-on-one support, like an instructional designer to understand the nuances of a specific course and a specific semester, and really just narrow down to give that guided support, that guided partnership to get that faculty where they need to go for the given semester, for the given course. So understanding and recognizing that every course presents its own challenges, and the background of every faculty member is different, and leveraging all of that together is one piece of where we are hoping to go.
Yeah. Also, I'd like to talk about an area of teacher, helping a teacher. For instance, I have a teacher that's very good in terms of online education, was able to help the other ones, at least the first few classes. Also, introduce a student who's willing to give the teacher some tutoring in terms of online. So that also works out. But of course, as an institution at Freemium State, we have a very good educational technology office that set up a lot of training sessions because it's needed. So they took on that road and did a fantastic job in the past few months. So just in this situation, everyone have to step up. But I mean, ultimately, it's really people to people. I mean, how we actually, make things happen here.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so the one thing I would add to what everyone said, which I certainly second, strongly second, is the fact that we cannot forget about the role of institutional leadership and signaling at the institution. So we cannot achieve success if we think that online learning is a temporary band-aid for a temporary problem, right? It's not sort of a modality of some kind of a mitigation of a problem. It actually represents the institution's opportunity to redefine what excellence is. And so we've been receiving at my institution a very strong message from the very top that this is not about a mitigation, it's about a new era and modality of excellence. And so in some ways we're trying to create a new norm sort of around what this is doing or what's happening. So what I mentioned before about faculty being clustered together as well, we're doing that purposefully because it's in fact part of a norming process. So the faculty realize that this actually is important. And yes, there are things around key components of support, etc. But you need to have a sea change in your habit of mind, in your attitude towards what's happening. That it's something you're running towards and not something you're running away from or having to tolerate for the time being.
I think that is a fantastic way to end the official panel conversation. As we go into our breakout rooms now, I know the facilitators have some questions already lined up. I do want to throw one thing out there, maybe as an additional question that the breakout groups can ponder. I think everyone is sort of in agreement that using online technologies is certainly an enhancement going forward to education, but there's the worry that disadvantaged groups are going to be even more disadvantaged for people who live in households where the internet access isn't very good or where just the simple physical environment is really not conducive to online learning. And perhaps that's something that the breakout groups can wrestle with in these smaller sessions.